North Atlantic, 280 miles southwest of Iceland. In the spring of 1943, a 23-year-old Navy cook discovered that enemy submarines had one fatal weakness. They couldn't hide what they threw away. What began as routine galley duty became the most unlikely intelligence breakthrough of the Atlantic War, and it killed more U-boats than anyone thought possible. The North Atlantic in April 1943 carried a peculiar kind of silence. Not the silence of peace, but the weighted quiet that settled over gray water when men knew something waited beneath. Convoy HX-233 moved through cold swells at 8 knots. 42 merchant vessels arranged in 9 columns, their hulls packed with steel, grain, and aircraft parts bound for Britain. The destroyer escort USS Brennan rode the convoy's port flank, her sonar pinging into darkness that swallowed sound and gave back only echoes of nothing. Seaman First Class Joseph Carpenter stood on the Brennan's fantail at 0520 hours, watching the convoy's wake spread white against black water. He was not watching for submarines. He was watching garbage. In his hands he held a cargo net filled with potato peelings, coffee grounds, and the crushed tins from yesterday's rations. Standard disposal procedure: wait for dawn, dump it over the side, let the Atlantic take it. But Carpenter had stopped following standard procedure 3 weeks ago. He had noticed something the officers hadn't. Every time the Brennan's sonar made contact, every time they painted a possible submarine, there was debris in the water. Not convoy debris, not the wreckage of torpedoed ships. Fresh debris, wooden crates marked with German stenciling, oil slicks that didn't match fuel oil, tins with labels in a language Carpenter couldn't read, but recognized from intelligence posters. The U-boats were throwing out their trash, and they were doing it in patterns. Carpenter had been a cook in Cleveland before the war. He understood waste. He understood that what people threw away told you more than what they kept. A restaurant's garbage revealed its menu, its customer base, its profit margin. A submarine's garbage, he reasoned, might reveal its position, its heading, its operational tempo. He had mentioned this to his division officer 2 weeks prior. The lieutenant had looked at him like he'd suggested navigating by tea leaves. But Carpenter kept watching. He kept notes. He sketched crude maps of where debris appeared relative to sonar contacts, and the pattern held. Now standing in pre-dawn darkness with the convoy's engine noise thrumming through the deck plates, Carpenter saw it again. 200 yards off the port quarter, something dark rode the surface. Not a periscope, not a conning tower, just a shape, low and irregular. He raised binoculars with cold stiffened fingers. A wooden crate, floating, fresh, and 20 yards beyond it, another. Then a third, a trail leading southwest, away from the convoy's course. His breath condensed in the air as he turned toward the bridge. The debris wasn't random. It was a road map, and somewhere at the end of that road, a U-boat was running submerged, confident in its invisibility, unaware it was leaving breadcrumbs for a cook who understood that in war, as in kitchens, nothing disappeared without a trace. The Atlantic U-boat campaign had entered its 3rd year with a casualty rate that made statisticians despair. In 1943, German submarines were sinking Allied merchant vessels faster than shipyards could replace them. Convoy HX-233 carried 180,000 tons of cargo that Britain needed to continue the war. If even a quarter of those ships went down, the strategic loss would ripple through supply chains from Liverpool to Cairo. The U-boats operated with near impunity in the mid-Atlantic Gap, that 1,000-mile stretch beyond the range of land-based air cover, where submarines could surface, recharge batteries, communicate with Lorient, and hunt at will. Joseph Carpenter had joined the Navy in December 1941, 2 weeks after Pearl Harbor. He was 23 years old, the son of a Cleveland diner owner, with no particular ambitions beyond staying alive and maybe learning a trade. The Navy assigned him to culinary school in Norfolk, then to the Brennan, a Buckley-class destroyer escort commissioned in February 1943. The Brennan, displaced 1,400 tons, carried three 3-inch guns, depth charges, and a crew of 186 men who lived in spaces so cramped that sleeping required a geometry of bodies. Carpenter worked in a galley 7 feet wide, preparing meals for men who ate in shifts because there wasn't room for everyone to sit at once. He had not expected the Navy to be educational, but the Atlantic taught lessons that no classroom could. It taught him that sonar was half-blind, that submarines could hide in thermoclines where water temperature shifted and sound bent away from hydrophones. It taught him that U-boats carried Type 7 diesels that left oil sheens distinct from American fuel. It taught him that German crews disposed of waste during the day, when convoys were least likely to investigate floating debris, and that this waste included not just food scraps, but also packaging materials, maintenance refuse, and occasionally personal items that told stories about crew morale and operational tempo. Intelligence officers in London and Washington knew some of this. They had broken German naval codes. They had U-ultra intercepts that revealed U-boat positions based on radio transmissions. But radio discipline was improving. More U-boats were running silent, communicating only when critical, making them invisible to signals intelligence. The convoys needed something else. They needed a way to track submarines that didn't depend on the enemy making mistakes. They needed a way to turn the U-boat's own routines against them. Carpenter's theory was simple. U-boats ran submerged during convoy attacks, but surfaced afterward to recharge batteries and clear the boat of accumulated waste. When they dumped garbage, they created debris fields that drifted with the current. If you map those fields relative to convoy courses and sonar contacts, you could extrapolate where the submarine had been, and more importantly, where it was going. A U-boat that dumped trash southwest of a convoy was likely repositioning to intercept that convoy's projected course. A debris field left behind after an attack suggested the submarine had moved away to reload torpedoes and prepare for a second strike. The Brennan's captain, Lieutenant Commander Robert Haynes, was 31 years old and had spent the previous year escorting convoys through water that swallowed ships without warning. He trusted radar, sonar, and visual lookouts. He did not trust theories proposed by cooks. But on April 18, 1943, when Carpenter presented him with 3 weeks of observations, debris sightings correlated with subsequent sonar contacts, Haynes looked at the maps and saw something that intelligence briefings had never shown him. He saw predictability, he saw vulnerability, and he saw an opportunity to kill submarines before they killed his convoy. That afternoon, Haynes signaled the convoy commodore with a proposal. Instead of ignoring debris, they would track it. Instead of assuming waste disposal was random, they would treat it as intelligence. And instead of waiting for U-boats to attack, they would use the enemy's garbage to hunt them first. At 06:12 hours on April 19th, the Brennan broke formation and turned southwest. Carpenter stood on the bridge wing with a handwritten chart showing debris sightings from the previous 36 hours. The patterns suggested a U-boat had shadowed the convoy from astern, dumped waste while repositioning, and was now likely submerged ahead of HX 233's projected course, waiting for nightfall to attack. Haynes had ordered flank speed, 24 knots, racing toward a position where theory said a submarine ought to be. The crew manned battle stations with the skepticism of men who'd chased too many false contacts. The water was dark gray under overcast skies. Visibility stretched 3 miles before merging into mist. The Brennan's sonar operator, a 19-year-old from Oklahoma, named Petty Officer Lewis, sat hunched over his equipment in a compartment that smelled like sweat and electrical insulation. His hydrophones swept the ocean ahead in rhythmic pulses. 0627, nothing. 0638. a thermal layer that bent sound into useless angles. 0649. Contact. Range 1,800 yards. Bearing 215 degrees. Moving slow. Lewis called it immediately. Haynes acknowledged. Altered course 5 degrees to starboard. Increased speed to 26 knots. Carpenter felt the deck pitch as the Brennan accelerated. He understood what was happening now in a way that transcended training. The debris field had led them to a hunting ground. The sonar had confirmed a target. But confirmation wasn't enough. U-boats could dive deep, change course, evade depth charges by exploiting ocean thermodynamics. What the Brennan needed was certainty, and Carpenter's theory provided a second layer of verification. If the debris pattern was accurate, the submarine would be positioned not just where sonar said it was, but where tactical logic said it had to be ahead of the convoy, shallow enough to monitor traffic through its periscope, preparing for a nighttime surface attack. At 0702 hours, Haynes made a decision that separated instinct from doctrine. Instead of attacking the sonar contact immediately, he ordered a wide circle to the north, as if investigating and then dismissing the contact as a false echo. The Brennan reduced speed, turned away, radioed the convoy that the contact was non-substantial. It was theater. Deception layered on deception. If the U-boat was listening, and it almost certainly was, it would hear a destroyer escort lose interest and depart. It would feel safe. It would remain in position. 40 minutes later, the Brennan completed a 7-mile loop and approached the contact zone from the east, with the rising sun behind her and the submarine's probable position ahead. Lewis regained contact at 1,200 yards. Firmer now, sharper, a metallic echo that sonar operators learned to recognize through repetition and luck. Haynes ordered depth charge crews to stand by. 8 K-guns loaded with 600-pound charges set to detonate at 150 feet. The Brennan closed to 400 yards. The ocean looked empty. There was no periscope, no wake, no visual confirmation of anything, except cold water and the mathematical probability that beneath it, a steel hull carried 50 men who did not yet know they had been hunted by their own trash. At 0748 hours, the first pattern dropped. 8 depth charges left the Brennan's stern and side throwers in a geometric spread, calculated to bracket a submarine's probable evasion maneuvers. They sank through green water trailing bubbles. The crew counted seconds. 14, 15, 16. Then the ocean erupted, not from one explosion, but from a sequence that felt like a single prolonged detonation. White water geysered 50 feet high. The Brennan's hull shuddered as shockwaves transmitted through water into steel. Carpenter gripped a stanchion and watched the surface churn. For 10 seconds, nothing. Then oil, a slick spreading fast, thick and dark. Nothing like the thin sheens U-boats used for deception. This was diesel fuel hemorrhaging from ruptured tanks, and rising through the oil, debris, real debris, wooden planks, life vests, a boot, papers that dissolved as they surfaced. The sonar contact had gone silent. The ocean had stopped echoing, and somewhere beneath the Brennan, a U-boat that had betrayed its position with garbage was flooding through breached pressure hulls, sinking into darkness, where no waste, no evidence, no survivors would ever surface to tell the story of how a cook's theory had killed them. Word of the Brennan's kill spread through the convoy within hours and reached Allied naval intelligence within days. By late April, 3 more destroyer escorts had adopted Carpenter's debris tracking methodology. By May, the technique had a code name: Operation Heap. By June, it had killed or assisted in killing 7 U-boats across 4 convoy routes. The Germans noticed. They began retaining waste on board, disposing of it only when safely distant from convoy lanes. But retention created new problems. Garbage accumulated in spaces already crammed with torpedoes, ammunition, and provisions. The interior of a Type 7 U-boat, never pleasant, became unbearable when 50 men's waste, festered in sealed compartments for weeks. Morale suffered, efficiency declined, and when crews finally did dispose of accumulated refuse, they created debris fields so large and concentrated that Allied escorts could spot them from miles away. The U-boat command adapted again. New orders went out in July. Compress waste, weight it, sink it in deep water only. But compression was imperfect. Wooden crates resisted crushing. Tin cans held air pockets. Even weighted garbage sometimes resurfaced when pressure changes during ascent ruptured bindings. The war had entered a phase where waste management had become a tactical liability, where something as mundane as potato peelings could compromise a $1 million submarine. Carpenter was promoted to petty officer second class in August 1943 and transferred to the Western Approaches Command Tactical Unit in Liverpool. His job was no longer cooking, it was teaching other crews to read the ocean's debris field like a text written in refuse. He briefed destroyer captains, corvette commanders, and intelligence analysts on the patterns. He explained that German crews disposed of waste at predictable intervals, usually dawn or dusk, and that disposal timing correlated with battery recharge cycles. He taught them to distinguish fresh debris from old enemy waste from neutral or Allied sources, tactical dumps from emergency jettisons. But the work carried a cost that no promotion could offset. Every debris field represented a U-boat. Every U-boat represented 50 men. Carpenter had grown up Catholic, attended Mass every Sunday, until the war scattered his family across 3 continents. He understood the moral arithmetic of combat, them or us, kill or be killed. But understanding didn't erase the knowledge that he had weaponized garbage into a system that drowned men in steel coffins, 200 feet below the surface. He thought about this at night, lying in a bunk in Liverpool, while rain hammered the barracks roof. He thought about the boot he'd seen surface after the first kill, and whether it had contained a foot, and whether the man who'd worn it had been a cook like him, someone who'd joined a navy to learn a trade, and ended up learning how to die in darkness. The breaking point came in October. Convoy on 206 was crossing the mid-Atlantic gap under heavy escort when sonar detected multiple contacts. Debris fields suggested at least 3 U-boats had formed a wolf pack ahead of the convoy's route. The escorts implemented Heap protocol, map the debris, extrapolate positions, attack preemptively. Over 18 hours, they sank 2 submarines and damaged a third badly enough that it limped back to France and never sailed again. 68 German sailors died. The convoy lost 0 ships. The tactical success was absolute. The strategic implications were enormous. But Carpenter, monitoring the action from Liverpool via radio reports, felt something inside him calcify. He had created a system that worked. He had turned waste into weapons. And the efficiency of it, the cold mechanical precision with which garbage led to coordinates, led to depth charges, led to oil slicks, felt less like victory than like an industrial process where the output was corpses. He requested reassignment in November. The request was denied. His expertise was too valuable. The Atlantic War was entering its final phase, and Operation Heap was credited with contributing to the dramatic increase in U-boat losses that would eventually force Germany to abandon the convoy interdiction campaign. Carpenter remained at his post through the winter of 1943 and into 1944, teaching, briefing, refining the methodology. He never cooked another meal for the duration of the war. He had become something else entirely, a specialist in death derived from detritus, a man who had discovered that in modern warfare, even trash could kill, and that knowledge, once weaponized, could never be unlearned or set aside. The Allied anti-submarine campaign turned decisively in mid-1943, for reasons that historians would later attribute to multiple factors: improved radar, long-range aircraft, escort carrier groups, U-ultra intelligence, and enhanced sonar. Operation Heap appeared in few official reports. Its contribution was difficult to quantify because debris tracking worked best in combination with other detection methods. But within the destroyer escort community, the technique was credited with at least 14 confirmed U-boat kills and numerous assisted kills, where debris tracking provided initial localization that sonar or radar then refined. Joseph Carpenter returned to the United States in June 1944, after 12 months in Liverpool. He was 26 years old and had been awarded a Bronze Star for meritorious service in combat operations. The citation mentioned innovative tactical analysis without specifying what he had analyzed. He spent the remainder of the war at a training facility in Florida, teaching anti-submarine warfare to crews preparing for Pacific deployment. The war in Europe ended in May 1945. The war in the Pacific ended in August. Carpenter was discharged in October with a rank of Chief Petty Officer and a service record that looked, to anyone who didn't know the details, like a perfectly ordinary naval career. He did not return to Cleveland. He moved to Portland, Oregon, took a job as a purchasing manager for a shipping company, married a woman he met at a USO dance in 1946, and had 3 children. He never spoke about Operation Heap, partly because it remained classified until 1976. Partly because he found that civilian life had no framework for understanding what he'd done. How do you explain to neighbors at a backyard barbecue that you once killed men by tracking their garbage? How do you describe the feeling of watching oil slicks spread and knowing you'd caused them? The war receded into a past that his children studied in textbooks and his grandchildren watched in movies, and Carpenter let it recede. He kept no mementos, joined no veteran organizations, attended no reunions. The British Admiralty declassified portions of Operation Heap's records in 1976 as part of a broader release of WWII's anti-submarine warfare documentation. A naval historian, researching convoy escort tactics, noticed Carpenter's name in multiple after-action reports and tracked him down in Portland. Carpenter was 58 years old, retired, living in a house with a view of the Willamette River. The historian asked for an interview. Carpenter agreed, reluctantly, and over 3 afternoons in the spring of 1977, he described the debris fields, the patterns, the kills. The historian asked if he was proud of what he'd accomplished. Carpenter thought about this for a long time before answering. He said that pride wasn't the right word. He said he'd done what needed doing in a war, where millions of people were doing things that needed doing, and that the outcome, survival, victory, the prevention of worse horrors justified the methods. But he also said that knowledge carried a weight that never fully lifted. He said he still thought about the boot surfacing through oil on April 19, 1943, and that thinking about it didn't change anything, but also didn't stop. The interview was published in a naval history journal in 1978 under the title Waste is Warfare, Non-Traditional Intelligence in the Battle of the Atlantic. It reached a limited academic audience and was largely forgotten. Carpenter died in 1993 at the age of 75. His obituary, in the Portland newspaper, mentioned his military service in a single sentence. It did not mention that a cook's observation about garbage had helped sink more U-boats than some entire destroyer squadrons, or that his innovation had saved thousands of merchant sailors who never knew they'd been protected by a system built on the principle that enemies, like everyone else, could not hide what they threw away. The Atlantic kept its secrets, the war kept its dead, and history, which remembers dramatic battles and famous commanders, mostly forgot the men who won through methods too strange, too mundane, too uncomfortable to fit into narratives of heroism. But the U-boat crews, who died never knowing why their positions had been compromised, and the convoy sailors who survived, never knowing what had protected them, were evidence enough that in war, as in all human endeavors, the smallest details, even garbage, could determine who lived and who drowned in cold water far from home.